everyone. This is Arlen Salty, the co-director and co-founder of Break Forth Ministries. Before we jump into this episode, my wife Elsa and I would love to invite you to head over to breakforthministries.com, where you can find out about our live events, our tours to the Holy Land resources, and so much more. And if you feel you'd like to help us out with the cost of putting Break Forth online out to the world for free, you can choose to support the ministry there as well. Don't feel pressure, but even $5 helps to keep us expanding this free library. Okay, let's get right to today's episode. This session is called Reaching Your Community for Christ by Lee Strobel. Let me tell you just a little bit about Lee. Lee is the former award-winning legal editor of the Chicago Tribune and best-selling author of more than 20 books. His classic, The Case for Christ, is a perennial favorite which details his conversion to Christianity. His recent release, The Case for Grace, won the Nonfiction Book of the Year from the EPCA. For the last 25 years, his life's work has been to share the evidence that supports the truth and claims of Christianity and to equip believers to share their faith with the people they know and love. Let me tell you a little bit about this session. Maybe you're wondering how you can help your church to become more successful in bringing the gospel to your community. Well, in this practical workshop, Lee is going to present specific, biblical, field-tested steps that any church can take to dramatically increase its evangelistic effectiveness. Here is Lee Strobel.
If you're going to buy a certain kind of a car, let's say a Ford Explorer, have you noticed all of a sudden you begin to see Ford Explorers everywhere? I mean, it's a weird phenomenon, but it's true. Well, that's your reticular activating system. If you didn't have this little walnut-sized mechanism in your brain, you would be flooded with information. You couldn't sort it out. You couldn't distill out what was important and what isn't important. But the minute you decide something like, I think I'm going to buy a Ford Explorer, all of a sudden you begin seeing it. There's no more Ford Explorers today than there were yesterday. You're just noticing them. And when your mind is thinking about my lost friend, my lost brother, my lost neighbor who I love and want to reach, and we're praying for them consistently, and we're looking for opportunities to get into spiritual conversations with them, it activates this thing, and you begin to see opportunities everywhere with other people. It's just a weird phenomenon, and I think there's a spiritual component. I think as we're faithful to God's command that we share Christ with other people, I think he is more willing to bring other people into our lives. So the first word is model. Own and model the value that lost people matter to God. The second step is to instill that value into the congregation. To instill the value that lost people matter to God. If you don't believe lost people matter to God, just read Luke 15. The story about the lost coin, the lost sheep, the prodigal son, and God's heart for lost people just shines through there. And so we need to figure out a way, how do we instill that into our congregation? Because the evangelistic value leaks away faster than any other value. You know, there's a lot of values in the church. The value of worship, the value of Bible study, the value of prayer, the value of community and fellowship, the value of mission, of serving the poor. There's a million of these values. They're all biblical values. The one that slips, and it's like a bucket with a big hole in the bottom, is the evangelism value. Because it's not about us. It's about other people. It's about lost people. And so, that value tends to slip away. And we need to, as church leaders, figure out ways we can continue to fill that bucket with evangelism, with the evangelism value. We need to help people see in our churches that a normal church, a normal functioning church, is a church that has lost people coming to faith. That's normal. Well, I flew in here yesterday into the Edmonton airport. And as I got to the Edmonton airport, if I looked around and there were no planes taking off, and there were no other planes landing, I would say something's wrong here. An airport is built for planes to take off and land. Why is this not happening? You say something's weird here. Well, we ought to look at our churches and say, one of the missions of our churches is to reach our communities for Christ. If people are not coming to faith on a pretty regular basis in our church, We got to stand up and say, time out, something's wrong. Something's wrong. This is not how the church ought to look. What can we do to help our people understand a normal church, a normal functioning church is one where people are periodically coming to faith? Now, what you don't want to do is turn this into a legalistic requirement. Therefore, everybody must share their faith twice a week or something. I mean, that's not going to get us anywhere. But I think what we need to do is help our congregation build a heart of compassion for spiritually lost people. The Bible says we're to be imitators of God as dearly beloved children. And so, imitators of God, what was Jesus' mission? To seek and save the lost. So we need to help them see part of normal discipleship, part of growth as a Christian, part of imitating God is to have a heart to reach our spiritually lost friends. One old saint put it this way: I fear for the salvation of any Christian who does not fear for the salvation of his neighbor. In other words, a thoroughly converted human being is going to naturally care about his neighbor's eternal destination. And if we don't care, something's wrong. Something is wrong with us. We're not becoming fully devoted followers of Christ if there's a hole in our discipleship, which is, I don't share my faith. I don't care that much about other people who are lost and so forth. Something's wrong. There's no planes landing and take it off in your heart, if you know what I mean. So we need to help people recognize that. So the first step, to model it. We got to model as leaders. Lost people matter to God. Then we got to figure out ways to instill that value. We do it through teaching. We do it through modeling. Let's say you're a Sunday school teacher, and let's say you all get together to pray before you teach Sunday school that day. To say to the group before, can I just say something? We're going to pray. Could we pray for my friend Bob? He's my neighbor, and he doesn't know Christ. And I fear for his eternal destination. And I've been praying that God would open up opportunities for me to get into a spiritual conversation with him. Would you just pray, as part of our prayer today, that God would open up a door that I could talk to him about Jesus? That's just a way of dropping. And you know what everybody else in that group thinks in the back of their mind is, who do I care about? Who am I praying for? It's just a way to instill that value. I was in a small group for about 10 years with Bill Hybels. He bleeds evangelism. And I remember one day he came into the small group and he was so excited. I said, what's going on? He said, I'm so excited. And we're thinking, what? Something big happened. He said, oh, yeah, something real big happened. I said, what? He said, Nick, I can't remember the guy's name, but I'll say Nick. Nick said he's going to come to Easter services. I said, who's Nick? Oh, Nick's the guy that runs the donut shop down the block. And every morning I come in, I buy a cup of coffee there. And I get to know Nick a little bit more every day. I ask him, I learn he has kids. I ask him about his kids. We kind of build this little relationship. And now we're kind of friends. I got credibility. And I invited him to church, and he's coming this Easter. Great. What's going on in my mind? I'm thinking, who have I invited? Who do I care enough about to stop at the same place? And so you know what I started doing? I started getting my gas at the same gas station at the same time every week. I would stop on a Monday evening on the way home from work, and I would gas up my car. Why? Because the same guy was working at the gas station every Monday late afternoon. And so I would get to know him. And I thought, I can do that. But you see, he just was instilling the value. And he can do it through preaching, through illustrations, through little comments here and there. And speed of the leader, speed of the team. He had that value. He was just instilling it in me. And he wasn't looking at me and saying, you need to be doing this and you need to be doing, it was like, no, it was like, you know what? Here's what's going on in my life. Help me or pray for me that God might use me in the life of my friend. And just the natural question is, well, then what about me? What am I doing? So we need to figure out ways to instill this value in other people. But here is the big problem. And this is what churches don't get. And yet it's intuitively obvious. Anybody a senior pastor? Or senior leader church? Okay. These guys are really, really busy. I don't think there's a harder working group of individuals in the world than senior pastors of churches. It is a hard job. Why? You ever see on the old TV shows many years ago, they used to have these variety shows like the Ed Sullivan Show and stuff like that, and they would have these guys who would come on, and they would have these sticks with plates on them. You ever see these? And they'd spin the plates, and they'd get this one going, then the second one, third one, they go back, get this one, and pretty soon they have half a dozen of these plates spinning. I'd say, oh, it's fantastic. You know, it was an act that people used to have in the old times. And Bill Hybels used this illustration. I thought it was perfect. This is exactly what a senior pastor does. He's got all these values in the church that he has to uphold. Reading the Bible, pray, fellowship, giving, all these things these values the senior pastor has to uphold. And it's like getting this plate going, oops, this plate stopped, oh, this one's wavering, whoops, this wasn't. And one of these is evangelism. He hasn't got time to just sit there and let the evangelism plate spin. He may do a series on evangelism and talk about God's heart for lost people. Everybody gets excited about it. Oops, you know what? The giving number is down here. I gotta get this plate go. Oops, now worship attendance is down. Let's do this. Oops, Bible study. He hasn't got time to just spin the evangelism plate. He may want to, but he hasn't got time. So therefore, first of all, church leadership needs to own and model the value of lost people matter to God. Secondly, churches need to figure out how do we instill that value through teaching, through modeling to the congregation. The third step is, the key word is appoint. We need to appoint an evangelistic leader for every church. It may be, if you're a small church, it may be a volunteer. Maybe a part-time thing. It may be a full-time responsibility, but every church needs someone whose only job is to spin the evangelism plate. He works in tandem with the senior pastor. He has his confidence and so forth, but he's in charge of spinning that plate. There's a guy named Carl Singer, a friend of Mark Middleberg's and I, who is a very successful businessman. And he was talking to Mark once, and he said something really interesting. He said, you know, businesses only have to do two things to succeed. Just two things. Mark said, really? What are they? Number one, keep your present customers happy. Number two, get new customers. That's all you got to do. If you do those two things, you're going to be successful in business. And here's the question. Who is in charge of new customers at your church? Who stays up at night dreaming and thinking about new ways to reach the community for Christ? A pastor hasn't got time to do that full time. We need someone who is devoted just to that, who's in charge of new business. If I called your church and said to your church, what's the name of your senior pastor? They would tell you. If I call your church and say, who is head of the children's ministry? They could tell me. If I call your church and say, who is in charge of evangelism? They probably say, oh, well, that might come under discipleship. Oh, I think that's about, no, well, actually, most churches, if there's no name next to something, nothing will get done. If there is no name assigned to it, nothing will get done. So we need a leader. In fact, in his book, Purpose-Driven Church, Rick Warren makes a comment. He said, if I would start a church today, one of the key first people I would get on board, either as a volunteer or a paid person, whatever, be a head of evangelism. To own that value, to be the point leader for that particular congregation in terms of the value of evangelism. Now, who is that person? It's not who you think it is. You know why? Every church has got an evangelism Eddie. Or you know what I mean? Some guy or some gal who is really into evangelism and is really weird. I'm not going to ask for a raise of hands, but my guess is most churches have got this guy or this gal, and they are gung-ho, but it's like, okay, then you go do it, because I can't do what you do, and you're a little weird. That's the truth. That's not the person you put in charge of this role. The person you put in charge of this role is a leader who has a heart for evangelism. He may not have a spiritual gift of evangelism. It's better if they don't. If you have a great gift of evangelism, most people say, oh, good for you. I don't have that gift. My gift is something else, and you go do it then. When we're all called to share our faith. So I say it's almost better to have a leader who just has a heart. He has the value the lost people matter to God. He wants to reach people. Let him or her be the head of the evangelism initiative at the church. And not evangelism Eddie is going to just chase people away. And it's very important that the pastor really anoint this person and take him in front of her, in front of the congregation and say, hey, you all know Nick here, right? Nick's, he owns an insurance company down the block. And he's built his company up to the point where he's got some employees and so forth. And he's volunteered to donate part of his time every week to be our new evangelism point leader. So isn't that great? He's going to give some time as a volunteer and serve our church that way. It's fantastic. But I need you to know something. He is not here to do evangelism on your behalf. He is not the staff evangelist that goes out and shares his faith. No. He is a resource for you. He is going to help you to be effective in your personal outreach to other people. And, if you have a Jehovah's Witness knock on your door and you don't know what to say, give him a call. He'll help you out. Or he'll point you to the resources. If you got a friend who's an atheist and you don't know what to say, give him a call. See if he can be and the guy's sitting there going, really? I'm going to do that? Okay, I better learn something about atheism. I better learn something about, and he's taking notes here. Man, I got a big job ahead of me. But it's good. I mean, they'll grow into that role. But his role or her role is not to do the job of evangelism. It's to do the next three things on our list. First thing, own and model the value of the lost people who matter to God. Second thing, we need to instill that value into the entire congregation. Third thing, we need to appoint a point leader in evangelism. And what is the first job that man or woman has? It's stage 4. The key word is train. We need to offer regular training on personal evangelism to every individual in the church. Evangelism is a spiritual gift. Yes, about 5% of people have the spiritual gift of evangelism. 95% don't. We need 100% of people in the game, or we're never going to reach our community for Christ. So job 1 for this new evangelism point leader is everybody, let's say this is a church. Everybody here, we're all in one way or the other, we're going to be trained on how to naturally and effectively share our faith with other people. And as part of doing that, it's going to raise the value of evangelism in us. It's going to instill this value that the lost people matter to God on a deeper level. It's going to prepare you to be ready as you encounter people to talk to them about Christ. Now, you may go through a small group experience training. We're going to do a seminar. We're going to maybe do a weekend series every once in a while. But there's going to be all these different ways. But over the next year or two, my goal is everybody here is going to be trained in one way or the other. And the key thing about the training is this. I think this is the key to helping churches penetrate their community. It's this. We have to learn that we don't have to be something great. We can never become like a Billy Graham or a Luis Palau who we look at who are leading thousands of people to Christ. And we look at we say, I could never do that. And we don't want to be something weird on a street corner that's going to chase people away. We have to help people understand you can be you. Your temperament, your personality, whether you're introverted, whether you're extroverted, whatever, God can use you where you are to reach people for Christ. I think that's the key. I remember when I was a new Christian, I became a Christian, walked in the door at Willow Creek, walked out as a Christian, moved away to work in a newspaper in Missouri, and so I went to a church. And one of the first days at that church, we were in a little Sunday school class. It was a small church. There was maybe 8 people in our Sunday school class. At the end of the Sunday school class, one of the guys in the class said, before we go, I want to say one thing. This afternoon, I'm going to go knock on doors of strangers in the neighborhood and try to tell them about Jesus. And if you love Jesus, you'll come with me. I'm a new Christian. I'm thinking, I love Jesus. I don't want to go knock on some door, some stranger. I'm sorry. Honestly, A, I'd be terrible at it. And B, I would. It's not me. So I felt terrible. I felt defeated. I felt like I'm a failure. This guy he's the spiritual giant. He's going to go knock on doors of strangers. What I didn't understand is there are some people who are really good at doing that. They're good at that. They're extroverted people. They're direct. They love it. No problem. God bless them. Most of us are not like that. Let's find out how God can use us as we are, not try to become something we're not. And so Bill Hybels had some incredible teaching on this, and I'm going to go through it real quickly because I think it just opens our eyes. The fact that there is at least 6 different evangelistic styles described in Scripture. And I bet as I go through these 6 styles, one of these you're going to go, that's me. Wait a minute, he's talking about me. I could do that. And the first one is what's called the direct style, the confrontational style. People who are bold and extroverted and kind of want to get to the bottom of things, they're the kind of folks, they can knock on strangers' doors and say, hey, I'm here. You want to talk about Jesus? They're good at it. God bless them. Look at Peter. Peter was bold. And, he was someone who, it was not out of his character to be bold. And so in Acts chapter 2, when he gets up and he's in front of a crowd in Jerusalem, and he looks him in the eye and says, hello, excuse me, you killed the Son of God. That was in his style. That was him. He was a bold individual. And God used it, and 3,000 people came to faith that day. So some people are direct like that. God bless them. Go do it. But most of us aren't. The second style is the intellectual style. Some are like Paul in Acts 17, where he's reasoning with the philosophers. And he's even using their philosophy to kind of, as a jujitsu move, to kind of point them toward God. And some people are like that. Some people love to study. They love apologetics, the reason for why we believe what we believe. They love studying world religions and how Christianity stacks up and what to say to a Muslim and what to say to a Hindu. And so they love that stuff. We want to encourage them not just to study and learn more, but to put that into action where they can engage people on that level and use their intellectual style to lead people to Christ. So, it's very interesting that the people I'm going to give you as examples in Scripture, they used a specific style. I'll give you the next example, it'll come clear. The testimonial style. Some people have a testimonial style, like the blind man in John chapter 9. Jesus heals this guy of blindness, and then they drag him before the religious leaders. Now, here's my point. What does he do? Does he confront them? You ought to bow down and worship Jesus as the Messiah. No. Does he reason with them and say, hey, let me give you 10 reasons why I believe Jesus is the Messiah? No. He said, I was blind, and now I see. Deal with it. It's the testimonial style. Some of you are really good about telling your testimony. My wife does not have this wild, I've got a wild testimony. I just gave it last hour and talked about, because this is partially my style. I have a blend of the intellectual style and the testimonial style. I go all over the world and I give talks to skeptics and I say, I used to be a skeptic like you. I used to be an atheist. This is how it affected my life. This is why I began to investigate the evidence for Jesus. This is what I discovered in my investigation. This is how I put it all together and received Christ. This is the difference he's made in my life. That's my style. Friends, I could do that 50 times a day, 365 days a year. I'm exaggerating. I do it. I do it all over the country. I'm doing it next weekend at a huge church in California. I'll do it the weekend after that somewhere else. Because it's my style and it fits me. I like to, tell stories, tell true stories. I was a journalist. So I like to tell true stories about life change. I like the evidence and the way it points toward Jesus being who he claimed to be. And so when I use that style, I'm alive. And by God's grace, tens of thousands of people have come to faith. But if you told me go knock on a door, I'd be freaking out. I'm serious. But that's my style. Some of you are good about telling your story. And it doesn't have to be, I was a wild atheist. The best stories are my wife's testimony. I tried to be a good person. I didn't know how Jesus fit into the equation. I didn't get it. I wanted to be nice. I wanted to be good. I wanted to know God if he was real. And then I met a friend, and she took me to church, and I learned that God offers forgiveness and eternal life as a gift of grace that he offers to anybody that will open their lives. So wow, and I received Christ, and it's a very simple testimony, but more people can relate to that than my testimony. I was an atheist, and it's like we don't have to all wish we were axe murderers. If I'd only been an axe murderer, then my testimony would be so good. It's the more everyday testimonies that God uses so powerfully. So anyway, my point is many people have that style. Other people have the invitational style. And the example in the Bible is John chapter 4, the woman at the well, where Jesus comes and begins to unveil to her the fact that he's the Messiah. So how does she react? She runs into town, it says, and what does she do? Argue with people and try to convince them? No. Does she preach at them? No. Does she try to confront them? No. All she said was, hey, this guy, he may be the Messiah. Come hear him. Really? They all rushed, and many people came to faith. She has the invitational style. These people are not the most articulate people maybe in the world, but they know how to say, come with me. They're good at building relationships, saying, hey, come with me to something. Come to me. Come with me to this Christian concert. Come with me to the Easter services at our church where the gospel is going to be preached. Come with me to the Christmas services. Come with me and let's watch this Christian movie together. They're good at getting people to do something with them. Before they were Christians, they were bad influences. Hey, come to the bar with me, Hey, get out. You ever try this crack cocaine? They were bad influence. But now as Christians, they like to. We had a guy at our church, I'll never forget this. His name was Bill. And I saw Bill, and he bought a new minivan. It seat like 9 people, one of these things. And I said, Bill, your kids are grown. Why did you buy this? He said, oh, well, how else am I going to get people come with me to church on Sunday? And that's what he does. He collects strays. And brings it, and he loves it. You know who else does this? Rick Warren's daughter, Amy. When she was younger, they would go down to the beach where the homeless were, and they would invite her and some friends. They would invite all these people to come hear her dad preach the gospel at Saddleback Church. Billy Graham's wife. She wasn't an upfront, fireball evangelist. What did she do? She would come into the towns where Billy was going to preach. She'd go into a shop there, and she'd be looking at a new hat, and she'd say, oh, by the way, my husband's going to be teaching and preaching tonight at the stadium. Would you like to come? And she'd just invite people. So some people are good at that, and God bless them. That's just as valid as the guy who's up there preaching the gospel, because if nobody brings people, right. The sixth style is let me give you another style. The interpersonal style. This is illustrated by Matthew in Luke chapter 5, where Matthew's a tax collector, hated, corrupt tax collector. He comes to faith in Christ. What's one of the first things he does? He throws a party. And he invites his tax-collecting, sinning friends to come to a party with Jesus and the other disciples. Why? Because he knows when Christians and non-Christians get together like that, spiritual sparks could fly. And some people like that. They're relational. They like to throw a party. They like to engage with people. Some are very introverted, and they just want to get a cup of coffee and a piece of pie and meet with the neighbor and have a one-on-one conversation. But they're very relational. They tend to go deep relationally very quickly. They tend to make friends very easily, and so forth. Some of you are like that. I'll tell you about a woman named Julie Harney. She came to our class where we teach this kind of stuff, and she had never shared her faith in her life. Because she thought, I'm not Billy Graham. She is maybe the most introverted individual I've ever met. Totally frightened of groups. But she's wonderful one-on-one. She's a very good friend to people. So when she realized, wait a minute, you mean I can be me and build relationships one at a time with people, and I could learn how to get into spiritual conversations and lead people to Christ? She said, absolutely. So she started to do it. Friends, in the first year after this woman who had never shared her faith before, housewife, living in suburban Chicago, introvert, in the first year, she led 14 people to Christ. 14 people! And she'd been on the sidelines. You may be like this. You may love to have a piece of pie and a cup of coffee and sit down with someone, get to know them. This is like the woman that led my wife to Christ. They just became friends. And through that, they shared Christ. One last style is the serving style. And the biblical example is Dorcas in Acts. Dorcas was, or Tabitha, as you also know, her thing was to make clothing for the widows in the neighborhood. And through that, be able to influence them for Christ. And this is apparently a very important style of evangelism because when she died, God sent apostles to raise her from the dead. So there's some advantages to having this particular style. But, some people are like that. They love to serve people. Build a Habitat for Humanity house. Go in the inner city and help run a soup kitchen. Run a clothing distribution. There's a million things that these people love to volunteer for to serve. And if, as part of that, they can learn to let the person know why it is they're motivated to serve because God has changed their heart, and they can learn to use that serving opportunity to gently broach spiritual topics and get into spiritual conversations, that's an incredibly powerful style of personal evangelism. So my overall point is this. If we can liberate 100% of the congregation for evangelism, invitational style, testimonial style, intellectual style, relational style, confrontational style, all these different people, then all of a sudden we have an engine that can really make a difference in the community. Because you think about it, only 5% of people have the spiritual gift of saying, leave me alone. I don't need you. I can share my faith, answer questions, lead people to Christ, and disciple. That's what I do. God bless you, man, but there's not a lot of you. Most of us need some help. I think the help is to say, I can be me. I can be me. I don't have a spiritual gift of evangelism, but I've got my style. And God can use my temperament and my approach to reach people for him. Now, we did a course on this called the Becoming a Contagious Christian Training Course. And that's one way to teach this kind of stuff. We can do it. I actually teach it with Mark Middleberg on video or DVD, so you can do it in a small group. Or you can do it in a seminar setting or whatever, but that's a resource where you can get 100% of the people trained in your church. Let's go to the fifth stage. The fifth stage, the key word is coalesce. Coalesce or bring together. And the point is, we need to coalesce or bring together those people in the church who are gifted in evangelism. As I say, it's only about 5 to 10%. But what we need to do, they're going to be on fire. So you train everybody in evangelism, and what you'll notice is 5 or 10% will come forward and say, I love this stuff. I'm going nuts. This is fantastic. Great. You're the gifted evangelist. Let's take that 5 or 10%. But here's the mistake churches make. They say, okay, you're gifted evangelist. I'm going to pull you out of men's ministry, and you can be in the evangelism ministry. I'm going to pull you out of women's ministry and put you in the evangelism ministry. I'm going to pull you out of the children's ministry and put you in the evangelism ministry. And pretty soon we have this segregated little evangelism club here, and the rest of the church is vacant when it comes to evangelistically passionate people or gifted people. That doesn't work. I think what the key is, there's a few of those people who are going to help you in your evangelism department. But for most of them, what they need is just to get together periodically, 4 times a year, on a Saturday morning for a breakfast. Could be 5 of you around a table. Could be at Willow Creek, we had hundreds of them. I think we had 1,000 the last time we did a breakfast forum that I spoke at. But so it's a lot of them in a big church. In a small church, could be just a few. Could be 3. But the point is to get together with them, say 4 times a year, and encourage them, tell stories among each other of their evangelistic adventures, stoke them up, maybe have a little teaching about evangelism, and maybe help them learn some skills and so forth, and then send them back to the women's ministry, send them back to the men's ministry, send them back to the children's ministry. So you've got these impassioned, gifted evangelists planted all over the church because they're radiating the heat, the evangelism value. It's going to influence all those different ministries. So we called it the frontline team when we did it at Willow Creek, and we would just bring them together periodically, have a breakfast, fire them up, and then send them back. And in the book, Becoming a Contagious Church, there's all kinds of ideas on how to do that. The 6th stage is the word create. That's the key word. We need to create safe places where Christians can bring their non-believing friends, so that the church can help them in the evangelistic process. We need to create safe places where we can invite non-believers to come. The average person hears the gospel 7 times before they come to faith. We need a safe place where they'll keep coming back. As I said, for the 5% of the gifted evangelists, they can do it on their own. They don't need this help. They can lead people to Christ on their own. I got a friend named Jay. Jay is just a confrontational, direct, gifted evangelist. You cannot shut this guy up. But he's good at it. But one day he was in his car and he was making a left turn on a 4-lane highway in Chicago, and it was raining out, and he hit the accelerator too hard, and his car spun out and was spinning down this highway in the rain. And cars were coming and skidding and sliding, but nobody crashed into each other, fortunately. But one car went into a ditch, and so everybody stopped. It's like, whoa, sorry about that. Man, I messed that up. Everybody okay? Oh, what about this car in the ditch? So he goes to the car in the ditch, and he opens the door, and there's a woman behind the steering wheel, and she's like, wow. And Jay said, are you okay? You all right? Yeah, I'm okay. I'm all right. And Jay said, if you had died just now, are you confident you would have gone to heaven? I said, Jay, what? And that's just Jay. He's got the direct style. You'd have to shoot him to shut him up. That's okay. That's okay. But as I say, most of us are not like that. That's why 5% of people have an evangelism gift, and even fewer have that style. So it's very rare. Most of us say, I want to reach my brother for Christ. I want to reach my neighbor for Christ. I want to reach my colleague for Christ. I need some help. Church, can you help me? So we need to create safe places where people can go and to bring a friend. So the way it would work is, and this is the way Willow Creek does it, and I'm not suggesting your church do this, by the way. I'm just saying this is what we did at Willow Creek. Most churches are not called to do this. At Willow Creek, we said, let's give our weekend services over to a service for the non-believer. So the deal is, I got a neighbor who's a skeptic. I reach out to that neighbor. We get together for coffee. I may be a testimonial style. I share my testimony with him. He's kind of interested. What do I do now? I bring him to a weekend service, which is designed for the non-believer, where he hears the gospel explained in a very reasonable way that he can understand, and then we're able to go out to lunch and talk about it, and you use that weekend service as a regular place to bring your friend as part of the evangelism process. It's a wonderful thing. Most churches are not called to do that, but we're all called to do something, I think. So other churches take different approaches. Some say, you know what, we're going to do a periodic outreach event. Super Bowl event, or Stanley Cup event, where everybody comes and watches a game together, and during the breaks there's some spiritual questions that come up or whatever. A safe place to bring somebody who's on a spiritual journey to help us reach him for Christ. It could be a women's event. You bring in a speaker, a men's event. It could be a debate. I'm going to talk about that at the plenary session tonight, but this afternoon. But that's a wonderful magnet to invite skeptics into your church. So there's a lot of opportunities to create all kinds of unique ministries to invite. In your church, I'm sure, has been doing it. And the question is, how can we do it better? And how can we do it on a regular basis so there's a place we can bring our friends to help us in that process, to hear someone who is a gifted evangelist explain the gospel in a persuasive and an anointed way so that we can then discuss it with our friends. So some do seeker-type services every week. Some do a seeker service once a month. There's a church in England just once a month. Their Sunday mornings are the one that you bring your non-believing friends to. And they do a service where the gospel is explained in a very compelling way. They use a little of the arts and so forth to really bring it alive. And everybody knows if I'm trying to reach my friend, this is the service I bring him to. So that's another way. But I'll give you a way that any church can do. By the way, there's a magazine. I don't know how many of you have seen it, called Outreach Magazine. But that has a million ideas. It comes out every other month. And you go to outreach.com, you can sign up, and it just has a million ideas for these outreach events that your church can do. But the last thing I'll mention, I'm going to mention this a little more this afternoon, is to do small groups for non-believers. I think this is the greatest evangelistic engine that's been really come to the forefront in the last 20 years. The idea is you get together half a dozen, or any number, it could be 3 or 4, 5, 6, non-believers in a little group led by a Christian couple, either a man and wife or 2 friends or whatever. And you go on a journey together. Invite your neighbors and so forth. And my wife did this. My wife is introverted. She does not have a gift of evangelism. She's a relational type person. She just went around to her friends in the neighborhood one day and said, I'm going to do a Bible study on, what the Bible says. Would you be interested in coming? Every single person she invited said yes. Because they were interested. They're friends, or they know her, and they trust her. They knew she wouldn't embarrass her or do anything weird. And they were curious. One woman said, yeah, I grew up Catholic, went to Catholic school. We never opened the Bible. I have no idea what's in the Bible. I'd love to do that. Great. And she got half a dozen women. They went through a little curriculum that my wife, again, not a teacher, just followed the steps, and God used in amazing ways. Anybody can do these groups. And any church can have this kind of ministry. We started these at Willow Creek in 1993 or 95. This is about 93. We hired a guy named Gary Poole to head that up. And pretty soon we had 1,100 non-believers in these groups. And we tracked these groups over time. And what we learned was amazing. If a non-believer joined one of these groups and stayed with it, 80% came to faith. 80%. Where else do you find an 80% conversion rate? It's unbelievable. And the thing is that anybody can do this group. And I see we've only got a few minutes left. How much time do we have left? 5 minutes maybe at the most. All right, let me give you a real quick example of how you do it. By the way, if you want the A to Z on how to do these groups or how to implement a ministry to do these groups in your church, Gary Poole wrote a book about it called Seeker Small Groups. All you need. Just read that book. It'll tell you everything. Because Gary, we bugged him for years to put it in a print, and he finally did. So Seeker Small Groups, you want to know how to do it. But you know how most of these groups start? And the book describes how you get people into the group, and it's actually very easy. And so you get them into the group, and the first session is kind of get to know you session, icebreakers and so forth. And at the end of the first group, the leader says, well, before we go, can I just ask everybody one question and just ask you, would you give me an honest answer? Okay, yeah, sure. I want you to answer this question. If you could ask God any one question and you knew he'd give you an answer, what would you ask? Bob, what would you say? Bob said, I know exactly what I'd ask God. Where was he when my baby died when my wife was in childbirth 5 years ago? Bob, that's a very good question. Let me just write that down, if you don't mind. Okay, Nick, what would you say? Nick says, well, you got the Bible, you got the Quran, you got, why believe the Bible? Anything else? Good question. Write that down. Sam, what would you say? Sam says, I got a next door neighbor. He's a Muslim. He's a nice guy. You tell me he's not going to heaven? I don't understand hell. You tell me he's going to hell? Is that what you're telling me? That bugs me. Good question. Write that down. Okay, you go around the group, and at the end, you hold it up, and you go, friends, this is our curriculum. Bob, next week we're going to start with you. Where is God when bad things happen? And you know what? I'll tell you right now, I don't have all the answers. I'm not theologically trained. I'm not a seminary graduate. I'm not the Bible answer man. But I'll do the best I can to kind of bring a spiritual Christian perspective. But I want to hear from you. I want to hear Bob and Nick and what all you have to say about that issue. And let's just talk about it. And so you get back, and now they're all motivated to come back because, yeah, Bob wants to hear his question, and Nick too, and they're all, yeah, this is great. And the point is, you don't have to have people in these groups. These groups are just an excuse to get together. It's not, I'm an apologist. I believe in the evidence. What the evidence does, it just knocks down some barriers. You know what brings people to Christ in these groups? Not that the leader of the group has the perfect answer to the question. No. They just talk about it. They listen to each other and validate it. You know what it is? It is the love of Christ expressed through the leaders of the group. That's what brings them to faith. That's why anybody can do this. We had a woman in our church, real obnoxious. And she would admit that. She was an atheist. She'd been coming to our church. And she said to me one day, said, Lee, I heard about these groups you've got for people like me who have questions. I said, yeah. She said, you know what? I'm going to join one of those groups. I said, oh, that's great. She said, no, you don't understand. I'm going to join just to cause trouble. I said, really? She said, yeah, I'm going to ask all the questions to make the Christian leaders squirm. I said, really? I said, good for you. I'm glad it's not my group. So I didn't see her for like 6 months. About 6 months later, we're doing a baptism service. She comes up to me to be baptized. And honestly, I almost fell over. And you know what I said to her at the baptism? What are you doing here? She said, I'm a Christian now. I said, wait a minute, time out. What happened? Last I saw you, you were going to go cause trouble. And she said something, friends, I will never forget. She said, Lee, the two Christians who led my group loved me even though I was obnoxious. And when I was sick, they brought me chicken soup. And when I was away on business and I couldn't come to a meeting that week, they called me and said, we missed you. We love getting together with you. You want to get together at Starbucks and have coffee? They opened their home to me. They listened to me. They validated where I was at. It was the love of Christ through the leaders of that group that led her to faith. And friends, that is why anybody can lead these groups. If you're an introvert, if you're an extrovert, if you're a genius, if you're not, doesn't matter. And so, friends, any church of any kind can implement a seeker small group ministry. Just get Gary Poole's book. It'll tell you A to Z how to do it. And I think we're out of time. So here's my bottom line point. We don't have to do the same thing in terms of creating a safe place to bring non-believers. We don't have to do the same thing, but we all have to do something. Whether it's a periodic event, whether it's a service, whether it's a special holiday thing, whether it's a small group, whatever, we all have to do something. But friends, as we follow these 6 stages, it's amazing how churches will come alive. Leaders own and model the value. They instill the value into others. They appoint a leader who's really empowered to lead this in the church. We train everybody in the church how to naturally share their faith in the way that suits who God made them to be. We coalesce the gifted evangelists and we send them back into the trenches to be influences in all the different ministries, and we create safe places where we can bring our seeking friends to find faith in Christ. We don't have to do the same thing, but that's a blueprint that comes from the Bible that we can all implement in whatever kind of church. And I pray God will use you and your church to make an incredible difference for Him. Thanks for coming. I don't want to hold you up. I know you're getting lunch.
Thank you, Lee, for that great message. So often the Christian church turns the Great Commission into the Great Omission. And hey, I'm guilty of that too. If you want to learn more about Lee Strobel, go to leestrobel.com. Thank you again for listening. We're adding more and more to this free online library of great sessions all the time. So remember to check back to see all the new content. And also remember, please head on over to breakforthministries.com where you'll learn more about our live events, Breakforth Holy Land tours, and so much more. Okay, we'll catch you again for more sessions at Breakforth Online.